Okay guys, this is the first video for Crime and Punishment and I'm going to have a look at Anglo-Saxons. Before I start talking about this topic, just remember that Crime and Punishment is a change and continuity study, and what that means is that you are always thinking about what has changed and what hasn't changed or what has stayed the same. So this is why it's so important to make sure you're clear about each topic, and also what factors are in play. So who are the people that are causing things to change? In particular for Anglo-Saxons, we're going to look at religion, we're going to look at government, poverty and society's attitudes. Okay, different topics have different factors. Sometimes they can be people, but I'll try and go over them as I do each video. So the period of the Anglo-Saxons is 1000 AD to 1066 AD, with 1066 being the date of the Norman invasion. So that's the date you need to remember. After the Romans left in 400 AD, Angles, Saxons and Jutes invaded Britain, and you've got a period of relative lawlessness. Blood feuds are the main way of people settling grudges or gaining justice, and this is where simply if somebody hurts or murders someone in your family, you have the right to go back and murder someone in their family. A stupid system would lead to retribution, revenge, and very little justice. And there's lots and lots of sources and case studies where families end up being in bloody vengeance battles with each other for generations. Okay, so as far as we're concerned, blood feuds are rubbish, they don't work, and they are replaced from around 1000 AD. And they are replaced with a really clever system. So the first thing I want to talk about is a tithing, or tithings. Essentially, tithings are groups of men aged over 12 who are put into a group together, and if one of them commits a crime, then the others have to pay a fine. And this works really well because it's a system based on loyalty and not letting down people that you're in a tithing with. So that's a really good system of self-policing. Hue and cry is very simply an alternative to a police force. There won't be a police force in Britain until 1829, so they have to do something. Hue and cry is where if you see a crime, you raise the alarm, you raise the hue and cry, and all people in the village or in the town are expected to join. So if you can imagine someone stealing a sheep and running off into the woods with it, somebody sees it, they raise the hue and cry, everyone who hears that hue and cry has to drop what they're doing or face a fine and chase that person. And this is a really good system for catching criminals because essentially the villagers and the peasants are policing themselves. The next one is trial by jury, which we still have today, mainly because it's a good system and it works. In Anglo-Saxon times, if you were accused of a crime, you would be taken to a folk moot or a 100 court, and you will be tried by a jury of your peers, and they would decide if you were guilty or not. Only difference today would be that if you had a very good standing within the local community, you might be able to ask for oath helpers or people to swear your innocence. So if you were a well-respected person in Anglo-Saxon society, you could probably get people to vouch for you and say that you're a good lad and that you wouldn't have done these things unless there was lots and lots of evidence against you. And finally, we've got the system of trial by ordeal. Okay, now this is a really complicated system, but essentially what we're doing here is if we cannot decide someone's guilt in a trial by jury, we are going to appeal to the highest, most all-knowing person we can turn to, which is God. So this is the system of things like trial by hot water, trial by hot iron, trial by cold water, trial by blessed bread if you are a priest, which doesn't seem to fit as fair for me, but there you go. And essentially what would happen here is that the person will be giving an ordeal to do. So for example, to plunge their hand into boiling hot water. If they heal, they are innocent. If they do not heal, or the arm goes gangrenous or infected, then they are guilty and they would be punished. Okay, and this is quite a complicated system because if you were guilty of a crime and you believed in God, like most Anglo-Saxons did, you knew that you were never going to fool God. So you would only really go through with a trial by ordeal if you thought you were innocent or you were just really stupid or cocky. But essentially, this is a really good system for weeding out those people who are lying. Negatives of it are really innocent people are just going to get punished, because it's chance. Okay, whether your arm heals or not has got very little to do with God. It's to do with whether you gain infection or how hot the water was when you put your arm in. So it is a system that works, but you can criticise it by saying that actually it's all chance. And finally, we've got the system of wereguilds, which are very, very simple. It's fines that are paid to the people who have had a crime against them. So, for example, if you're walking down to a local church and somebody attacks you and cuts your ear off, then they will have to pay you a fine equal to what the payment for that was. So it's a system of fines. It's fair. But it's unequal in the sense that a peasant or a Welshman who was particularly discriminated against would only have a very small weregild. So if you murder a peasant, you have to pay, say, 50 shillings. However, people who are higher up in society and in fact royalty, weregiilds will be extremely, extremely costly. So it's a fair system of fines, and we still use fines today. It's worth mentioning that, but it's very unequal. This might seem a little bit simple, but keep in mind there are no police. Okay, there are no prisons, and that people would only be imprisoned until their trial. And when we say imprisoned, we mean locked inside a very sturdy shed or hut or whatever until they are brought forth to trial. Punishments at this time are very brutal. The main thing to remember here is that these are deterrents. Now, fines were used for lots and lots of things, and fines were the preferred method of dealing with low-level crime. However, corporal punishment and capital punishment are used quite a lot in this period, and these are pretty nasty things, pretty brutal. So with corporal punishment, we're talking about things like mutilation, cutting off an ear or a nose or a hand, usually for repeat offenders, people who keep stealing or refuse to learn their lesson. Or you could be whipped or placed in stocks or pillory for 3 days, which wouldn't be very nice. And finally, for those people, murderers, people who commit really serious crimes, we've got capital punishment, which would usually be hanging, although there are some counts of beheading as well. So punishments are very severe, and they're about deterring people from committing crimes. So all in all, Anglo-Saxon crime and punishment is about deterrence. Okay, you are going to be costing people money through a tithing. You are going to be forced to do horrific trials by ordeal. You will be fined, or you will have corporal or capital punishment. So everything about this is deterrence. Okay, and there's a huge focus on your loyalty and oaths. Okay, so if you were, for example, if you stole something and you cost your tithing a fine, that would be seen as breaking your oath. So stealing and committing crime is all about breaking oaths. And finally, the court system. You have at the bottom folkmoets, or the 100 courts for local towns and villages. And then above them, just to mention, 100 courts and folkmoets, they would meet monthly, every 4 weeks, to decide on to do trials and to decide on people's guilt. Shire courts, a little bit more serious, would meet twice a year. And then finally you have royal court, okay, for very, very serious criminals. So hopefully that overcap of Anglo-Saxon period has helped, and the next time I see you, we'll do the Normans.